I don't see these supply chain issues getting fixed in less than 4 or 5
Not
years.
now.
So, yeah.
This is the Time on Wing podcast. Welcome back. I'm Courtney Miller with Visual Approach Analytics. With me, as always, Garrick Deschaffon of Collateral Verifications. Garrick, who do we have to talk to today?
Well, hello, Courtney, and welcome back. It's been a while. We apologize for the long stint. However, it is, I will say, it is kind of the fans' fault, right? They send us business, and we stay busy. So,
work.
I know. You send us work, and so therefore it's hard to keep things going. But to focus on today, we are talking to Phil Seymour. And Phil Seymour is currently president at IBA. Currently, yeah, I said IBA. Phil's with IBA has been since 1997. And his roles at IBA have included CEO, president, COO, managing director, and head of technical services director. He was also an aviation technical advisor for Extor Group Aviation Services. He was an engineering director for Ambassador Airways. He was a technical services engineer for Caledonian Airways. He was a senior development engineer for Air Europe, not Air Europa, but Air Europe. He was also a senior development engineer for Danair Engineering. He was a certifying engineer for Saudi Arabian Airlines, as well as a certifying lead tradesman for British Airways. So he's worked for quite a few airlines, which is kind of cool. He has got his ONC in engineering and high diploma in aerospace studies with a postgraduate diploma in management studies. And he is also an ISTAT certified senior appraiser like me. In any case, it's going to be a lot of fun. I've known him for a long time, and he's a great guy. He's got a great personality, great stories, so it's going to be a lot of fun. So, Phil, this is your time on wing.
Just a quick intermission before we continue with the show. We do get a lot of questions about how our listeners can support the show, and frankly, the easiest way is to continue the spirit of the show, which is just to reach out to us at conferences. But we also run businesses as well, and you can support us by supporting a lot of the work that we do. You can support the work that I do through Visual Approach by visiting visualapproach.io, where we produce a lot of research and analysis, a lot of data visualizations.
From my side, obviously, I focus more on metals, so anything that's aircraft related, if you're looking for valuations, whether it's on aircraft engines, I'm happy to help with any of those types of projects. So we appreciate certainly the opportunities to work with all of you. And we certainly also appreciate just the fact that people are willing to listen to what we have to say and enjoy kind of our thoughts and takes on what we think is a fascinating industry. So thank you.
Okay, back to the show.
Well, Phil, look, thank you very much for being on the podcast with us today. I've known you for, a long time. And so it's kind of nice to have you on. And as we do with all of our guests, we'd love to hear how you got started in aviation. You've got a tremendous background. So, kind of let us know. How did you start getting, interested? Where did the passion come from? And then we'll kind of go through where you got to today.
Well, I suppose it was inevitable because I was born sort of underneath the flight path of Heathrow Airport. So
it's
I was
that
breathing
de-ice
in
runoff and the jet fuel. It just,
Yeah. So I was breathing in those fumes for years, and I could say that that's probably the reason why it stunted my growth and my hair fell out, but I don't think I'll be suing British Airways anytime soon. It was kind of inevitable. I know this is a podcast, but I'm going to hold up something here from the BEA News in, I think that says October 1970.
Yeah.
So I was a mere just about 11 years old then. And on the front page is a picture of my brother and sister joining my dad at BEA. And it said, brother and sister make it a Seymour treble. Okay. And it says that...
That's really cool.
It says Les Seymour, a planning engineer in the servicing base, is a BEA man through and through, having joined the airline on its formation in August 1946. So with a brother who was 11 years older than me, well, he still is 11 years older than me, and a sister who's 8 years older than me, both at British Airways, it was kind of, that's where I had to go. Although it's kind of a twist. I don't know if I was really that interested. I think I wanted to do more arty and stuff like that. But when it came down to it, in the UK here, we had these apprenticeships. I was actually listening to Conor McCarthy's podcast with you, and it's kind of a similar track in a way. That they kind of take these 16-year-old kids who don't really want to go all the way through the university and high school thing. They want to do something more vocational. And I suppose I was one of those. I was happy to, let's say, leave school at 16, which sounds really quite crazy. But, that was to join British Airways in 1976. And you just think, if you go back, so I've said, when I was 11 years old, my brother and sister joined my dad at BEA, as it was then. In 1969, so as a 9-year-old, I can remember in the school playground, they said, right, at 1 p.m. lunchtime, all you kids, they didn't call us kids, all you students, go into the playground because Concorde is going to be flying over London and it's going to create a sonic boom, right? And so as a 9-year-old kid, I was listening to supersonic booms. I was watching, Armstrong walk on the moon. I was watching the first Pan Am 747 land at Heathrow, and all of this as a 9-year-old. So, yeah, I was going to say now fast track to now, maybe not quite now, but I think, there was so much going on in that aerospace space world that I realized I needed to reach for the skies, I suppose. But so just going back, I joined British Airways as it was then. It was a nationalized airline, so therefore it wasn't mainly about profitability. It was getting all of these kids into aerospace. It was seen as a training academy, partly government funded. So there were literally a couple of hundred of us joining British Airways in 1976, and you kind of go through everything from the first 18 months. You're filing away at metal blocks, and you're learning about welding, and you're learning about really stuff. Are you going to go into the mechanical side of the business, the sort of A&P side, or mechanical type things, or are you more into the electronics and avionics? So they kind of figure that out, and you figure it out, they figure it out, what your strengths and weaknesses are over 18 months, and then you kind of then go on a program of going into different workshops, different hangars, working on different types of aircraft. So now by this time, a very important thing happened. I got married to Jane. We were really young, right? And we're still really young now, but I meant I was 18 and Jane was 16 when we got married, and we were. Yeah. What did you?
Is that
did you just
technically
did you just spit
legal,
that coffee
Phil?
out, Cord? It was legal here. Yeah. Yeah. It was technically legal, although her father did have quite a big shotgun. So no, it was we'd known each other since we were kids, really. It was inevitable. So we always thought we'd get married. The fact we got married that young didn't really matter. And in fact, in those days, it was a tax break. I was getting paid more money to get married. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So what that meant was I started to take things quite seriously. I thought I'm going to have to work twice as hard if we're going to not get through it. But it was quite a game-changing thing. So we ended up with I did take things quite seriously, and everything that British Airways threw at me academically, I was soaking up, and I was quite happy to be spending my evenings studying. And and British Airways was great because it was really it would take you, and if you were really keen, it would throw things at you. I'm going to show another exhibit now, Exhibit 2. is a British Airways news, because obviously I wanted to be on the front cover, just like my older brother and sister. And I'm the guy there with hair. Can you see that guy there with hair? If you're listening on a podcast, you better get onto YouTube.
Yeah, I don't know you with hair, so I don't know. I don't know if I believe it.
It could have been anybody.
Is that fake news?
It could have been anybody. But again, that was to celebrate the 60th year of the first commercial London to Paris commercial service, and they picked a few apprentices.
60th year, wow.
That was that was 1979, and I was then kind of halfway through my apprenticeship. So this could be. I've only got an hour and a half, haven't I? This could drag on for ages. I've only got to when I was 20. Does that answer your question? How did I get into aviation?
Yes, it sort of does. Absolutely. So how long were the apprenticeship at that point? Because you said you were,
the basic apprenticeships were like 4 years. But because I took things seriously, you could go into an even higher level of dare I say, academic stuff. So my apprenticeship was actually 6 years, because I did some of the other diplomas and management studies and stuff like that. But it's great, I completed that after 6 years. But at that point, British Airways was really changing from being a nationalised airline with 50,000+ employees to being a privatised airline, and there was a massive cut down of manpower. So it went from like 55,000 to 35,000 employees, just at a point when I'd finished all my academic stuff. I had approvals on all kinds of aeroplanes, was keen to get out of my sort of overalls mechanic into some sort of management role, but there weren't any. Basically, the unions had basically clamped down and said, look, we've really got to manage this process, blah, blah, blah. You know what those sort of regimes are like. And after a couple of years, so it was 1984, end of 1984, so I'd been with British Airways for 8 years. Suddenly there were these vacancy notices for these promotions to become what they called an aircraft engineer 2, which meant suddenly you'd have a blazer and a tie and a couple of stripes, that you'd be, let's say, supervising all of that work. And I remember I went to an interview in November 1984, and I said to the interviewing panel, I said, "Oh, how come that there are these vacancies? What's happening with the company?" And they said, "Oh, haven't you heard? Saudi Arabian Airlines are hiring for mechanics in Riyadh, and we think they're paying like £40,000 a year." And bearing in mind, at that point, I was on like £12,000 a year. I've never got out of an interview faster than that. Okay, I just wanted to get out of there as quick as possible and find out where these interviews were happening. Saudi were interviewing in London, and I remember, in those days, it wasn't like I had a mobile phone. It was, this was 1984. I had to find a hard copy telephone directory for Saudi Arabian Airlines, I had an interview within a couple of days. They said, "Yeah, we're interviewing, please come along." And I met a guy, and he retired from Avitas about 10 years ago, a guy called John Hanson. I don't know if you remember him, Garrick. He was one of, he used to run the technical side. He was one of the shift leaders with Saudia, and he did the interviews, and I was sort of prepared on all these things I might get asked. And he said, "Have you ever changed a VIGV controller on an RB211 engine?" And I said yes. And he said, "Can you start with us in Riyadh on January the 6th? I thought, wow.
Wow.
So I remember going home and...
Hold on. Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Had you really changed that controller?
No.
Yeah,
no.
you gotta add that part to the story. That's great.
Yeah, I kind of knew enough about it.
Sure.
We might need to edit that.
You could Google
we might
it.
need to edit that out, Courtney. We might need to edit that out. I knew enough about it because as I said it, I thought he's going to ask me about slope and datum adjustments on these VI. So I knew the theory, but I hadn't actually changed one. So well spotted, Courtney. I've been cross-examined in several aviation legal cases, and you've got all the makings of a barrister there. Okay.
Truly not. The only reason is because that's something I would do. I just make up an answer and then hope they didn't ask the next one.
I remember going home and saying to Jane, I've got a job, and there's good news and bad news. She said, what's the good news? I said, well, we're going where the sun shines. And she said, well, what's the bad news? I said, well, it's quite a long way away, and I know you're going to miss your family, and I'm going to miss my family, but the kids are going to love it. Oh yeah, so by this time, so by 1984, we'd had 3 kids by then. Okay, so I was just about 25 years old. We had 3 kids, and I was keen that we had a slightly bigger house. So I wouldn't say it was all about the money, but going into a tax-free regime from working in West London, 14,000 a year to 40,000+ a year. But and the 2 older kids by then, Lee and Emma, were kind of 7 and 7 and 5, something like that. They went from being in a school in Hounslow, West London, with 30 kids in a class, to being in the international school in Riyadh, where there were like 12 kids in a class, and teachers who really enjoyed being there. So it was a great environment for them. Just as a side view, my aviation picture behind me, again, if you're listening to the podcast, unlucky, there's a picture of an Air Canada 737 MAX. So our eldest son Lee is actually a captain with Air Canada on the MAX, based out of Vancouver.
That's great.
And Emma, our oldest daughter. Emma, our oldest daughter, runs a travel agency. So in a way, if they were doing a Time on Wing podcast in 20 years' time, they'd be telling you that they were forced into aviation as well.
Anyway. Well, let me tell you about my dad.
And they would get a picture of you from, when you were on the newspaper. Like, man, this is when he had hair.
These are things they used to call newspapers.
That's right,
that's right, and this is one that he signed for me. Yeah, only kidding. Yeah. But that was great because working in Riyadh in the mid 80s, it was a real culture shock for the family. The regime was pretty restricted, but I say by this time, I think then we had the 4th child on the way. So Jane was, really quite happy being that stay-at-home mum, if I say that. But on the compound with other expat families, it was almost like 3 years of holiday. But I didn't really want to be a permanent expat. I missed the rain. I missed the green grass. I missed going to Arsenal Football Club and watching matches and that kind of stuff. I suppose I should say I missed the family that we had back here. But so then I jumped into I jumped into like a tech services job back here with Dan Air, and Dan Air's maintenance base is in a place called Lasham in Hampshire, and we still live in that locality. It's kind of near Farnborough, so if you ever do the Farnborough Air Show, we're close by. And then it was a progression. I suppose I've then worked for 7 airlines, and then it was had a tough time with Air Europe because Air Europe went out of business in the early '91. It was kind of that recession that hit with the first Gulf War. I don't know if I'm now coming into a period that you two can remember, But the 91 First Gulf War, aviation and air traffic really did take a hit. There was a lot of concern about terrorist attacks and things. So air traffic, particularly into Europe, had slowed down. Air Europe, but yeah, by this time I was with Air Europe, and it's actually, it was a shame because I really enjoyed that job, because I was we'd ordered MD-11s out of Long Beach, and I was the guy who was in and out of Long Beach going to things like those industry steering committee meetings, working group meetings, where you're going through all the systems and talking about failure mode. So it was really good techie stuff, but Air Europe went out of business, and I can remember coming home saying, "Hi Jane, I haven't got a job," and it wasn't like we had huge savings to fall back on. It was here we are, mortgage. How do I pay the mortgage? We had a bit of support from family at the time, but it was pretty scary. What do you do when all I've known is airlines, and airlines weren't recruiting anybody? It was a real
this is recession. It's not obviously why any of us choose aviation, but so many people have that very same story, right? So many people in aviation have been laid off at some point, and it's terrifying, right? Especially for a group of professionals. I think I could say we're kind of unique in that we chose the industry, and we'll do whatever we need to do to stay in that industry, because we just kind of geek out on it, and the entire industry's down, right? 9/11 would have been the other time. The GFC did okay, but of course COVID. But you're certainly not alone in having gone through that challenge.
And I think I did turn my hand a little bit, because I'd got heavily into engine borescope inspections, because when I was with Saudia and then Dan Air, this was in the wake of the British Air Tour's 737 accident in Manchester, which was related to the JT8 engine combustion chamber repairs and the liners. So there was a lot of borescope inspections. So I found myself unemployed, but I had access to a borescope kit, and I thought, well, my other area of passion was cars and classic cars, and I started inspecting the chassis of cars with a borescope kit, and for the summer of 91 I was rust proofing classic cars.
No way, that's amazing.
Wow. I was showing people the inside of their chassis with a borescope, and I'd rigged up a television to show them. I used to go to car shows with a generator that would get the TV started. This was when a TV wasn't a flat screen; it was a huge cube, right?
It was a box, yeah.
I would kind of go poking around in their vehicles, saying, "Hey, look, I can get into the chassis, and we can see if there's any corrosion in there, and we can blast the rust-proofing compound in." And for a while, I kind of really loved doing that. But reality kicked in. I was offered a job back with Caledonian Airways in sort of the August of 92, and then really things were moving. I think out of all of that downturn, as I learned, and as you know, you can have a downturn in aviation, but things do come back. We're very resilient as an industry, and then I was asked did I want to join a group of folks who were going to start an airline, and I thought, well, hey, I think if I'd have been at British Airways then for 15 years, I probably wouldn't have thrown that job in to start an airline. But we started Ambassador Airways up in Newcastle. It was too thinly funded. It was one of those lessons I learned that, you need a lot of money to start an airline. But it was great for me, because on my CV it showed, founding member of a UK charter airline, and that had its own challenges, because in the winter of 93 we did a damp lease of two 757s into Avianca, and I was volunteered by the management to be the guy who'd spend the winter down in Bogota in Colombia. But that was fantastic. I don't think the pilots enjoyed it, because suddenly they realised if you're flying in and out of Bogota that's 8,000 feet above sea level, the aircraft flies a little bit differently than when it's at Heathrow. Okay.
But it's a 757. I mean, come on. That thing's a rocket ship. So it will, right? Yeah. I guess I was more interested in, you spent summer down in Bogota. It's not hot in Bogota.
No.
Like not even during the summer. I mean, it's what, like 18, 19 20 degrees?
Yeah. I can't remember a hot day down there. And it was, it was pretty... It was a tough operation. Like I say, we were flying from Bogota. We were doing sort of hops. We were going into Barranquilla and Medellin, but then going on to Los Angeles or up to JFK into Miami. So it was a strange operation because these aircraft were still on the UK register. Okay, they were transferred under this ICAO Annex 6 basis, where they're still on the UK register, but the UK CAA write to the Colombian Aviation Authority and say, could you just oversee these for us while they're there? Okay, but the UK CAA were very concerned about things like bogus parts. Every single part we had on the aircraft, we basically had to move an engineering and maintenance stores facility to Bogota. But it was the pilots did have fun. I think the one problem did have, there's plenty of power, but probably too much. We put them through the simulators before they went there, and very, very fortunate we did. Basically, if you're landing this aircraft at about 30 knots faster than you're usually landing the plane, the instinct of the pilots was to grab those thrust reverse levers, pull them back as hard as possible. You can imagine them with their feet on the rudder pedal, or on the pedals, pulling those reverse thrust. And it was crazy because even in the simulator, these engines were going into N1 overspeed. They were
the air the so thrust reverse.
Yeah, because of that less dense air. So we were really worried that they were going to be giving us some problems with N1 overspeed. You don't want that because you haven't got much choice. You sort of look at the maintenance manual: N1 overspeed, action, change engine. It was a fascinating time, and it was a bit stressy because it was in the era Pablo Escobar was still running stuff, and we had to keep low profile.
I've seen the TV shows.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, we've seen the shows. Yeah.
That was kind of fun, but Ambassador Airways sort of disappeared, and by this time I joined some guys running an outfit called X-Tour Group, and they were the owners of Aurigny Air Services, that were the Channel Island operator, and they still are, flying into Guernsey, Jersey and Albany, etc. So I then started to get a bit into more of the regionals. It was, I'd previously worked for the Saudirs and the Danairs and British Airways, so this was more regional stuff, and the guys at X-Tour wanted to actually get involved in turboprop leasing, so we bought a small turboprop operator, and that's kind of when I got into that leasing thoughts, and I thought, actually, this is a hell of a lot easier than running airlines. So I think I then, that was a switch that went on in 93, 94, and then I got into, we got involved in some of these sort of pre-purchase inspections for an outfit called Aerosvit in Ukraine. So I spent a bit of time out in Kiev. But at that point, my buddy from British Airways and Saudi, Laurie Hatcher, gave me a call and said, what was I up to? I said, well, I'm doing this, that, and the other. What's on your mind? He said, well, he wanted to make some changes at IBA. He wanted to grow it from being like a 10-man technical inspection shop and an appraisal firm into moving it onward and upward through that new, I think what he was regarded as, if you look, when he started that in sort of 1988, operating leasing was only just really getting going. And it was a realization that there's a lot of banks involved in funding those lessors, and the banks were asking lots of questions. So it was quite an easy choice for me to join my buddy Laurie Hatcher. I said, well, let's give it 6 months. And as you've probably heard many times, you join somewhere for 6 months, and then it's like Hotel California, right? You can check in, but you ain't going to leave. Right.
Yeah. Right.
Hotel IBA.
Almost 30 years later, here we are.
So was Stu already at the company, or
no? So actually, going back to Saudi in 1985, that's when I first met Laurie Hatcher, and Stu Hatcher went to school with our eldest son. Stu is a couple of years older than our eldest son, but they all went to school on the same Saudi minibus, right, to the British school. So I knew of Stu and his sister Nicola, of course. But I think Stu mentioned on the podcast, he used to go to the IBA Christmas parties because it was a family affair. So I saw him again there, and I can remember having a chat with him about. He kind of found himself in a bit of a rut in that whole sort of chemical industry and pharmaceuticals, and was thinking about stuff. Oh, should I be a pilot? Blah, blah, blah. But I think it was sort of inevitable. His love of numbers and algorithms, it seemed like a natural fit that, here we go into a period where the late 90s, we all thought that systems were going to crash. We all thought that those old DOS systems were going to fail, and so he joined the business and was putting a lot of effort into really grabbing the data and putting it into something more manageable. And in those days, that was let's do a publication. It wasn't sort of rocket science then, thinking about subscription as a service and all that kind of stuff. It was let's look at getting all of this stuff into some publications. And I think we obviously there were others around. So the aircraft values book, we were just joining others. Avitas had their blue book, and there was a few others out there. But then I said, well, I think there's other stuff that people were asking us about. Engine values. We should be looking at engine values. What's the shop visit costs, LLP stacks, and that sort of thing. What are the key airworthiness directives on engines? So we got into that sort of engine values book, and then lease rates themselves. We separated lease rates from values. So we were just selling these publications. It was kind of almost a sideline, because we felt as if we needed that data ourselves. So therefore, we could publish it as a sideline. We weren't thinking that commercial at the time. We grew that business, and it wasn't really. It was all stuff that we thought we would like to see ourselves. We didn't have a big grand master, calling the tunes. Well, we did. We had Laurie Hatcher, but he was kind of the thing I loved, and the thing I was trying to get with everybody we hired at the time, I would say, look, we're not regulated. We're not an airline. We are not a maintenance organization. If you've got an idea to produce something around our data or have ideas on things, come with them. And that's when we started to then do a little bit more around maintenance cost benchmarking, because one of the tech guys said, it's there's all these C&D checks, landing gear overhauls. There's more to it than just the value of the aeroplane. So I wanted to encourage people to be, I didn't want to be a boss who was just going to tell people what to do. I wanted to encourage and inspire them to have their own ideas. So we've done a bit of a fast track to maybe the last 10 years. But that's kind of how I got into aviation, and suddenly where the last almost 50 years. I mean, you pointed out next year will be 50 years since I joined British Airways. And I joined one of these WhatsApp groups. One of the guys has said, hey, we should have a big reunion next year when we've done 50 years. So that's, that's almost 100 people. God rest some of them. They're not around anymore, and most of them are retired, and they stayed at BA all the way through and probably retired when they were 60. And it's really kind of weird. But I don't feel like I want to retire. I'm not a pipe and slippers guy.
I mean, I guess if what we could do is, I'd love to hear maybe more about, kind of, you talked about where IBA was when you started. It's obviously kind of, I feel like it's grown leaps and bounds, and it's a very different, I think, company today than it was, 25 years ago or even 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear kind of where IBA is today, what you guys have done, and then we can kind of go from there.
Yeah, look, I think, when I joined Laurie, it was IBA had just won a contract to work for British Aerospace Asset Management. I'm going to sort of summarise this. There may be some people who worked at British Aerospace at the time who might argue with me, but British Aerospace had produced the 146, a wonderful short takeoff and landing, 4-engined regional jet. And I think the issue was it wasn't actually selling. People didn't want to pay cash for it because in that sector, the regional jet sector, and it's probably the same probably holds true today, financing aircraft is really tough. So British Aerospace set up their asset management division that almost became an in-house lessor. So if you're going to do that, you then have to take responsibility for the deliveries, the ongoing inspections, the issues that the operators have, and the redeliveries. So British Aerospace Asset Management outsourced all of that work to IBA. So it was a very lucrative contract. We were paid on a per aircraft per month basis. There was 150 aircraft. There were the commercial teams at that were there at British Aerospace. So people in the industry these days, like Mark Hughes of Falco, was one of the commercial folks we were liaising with at the time. They would basically say, "Oh yeah, we've just placed 6 aircraft with Hamburg Airlines, and you guys have got to do the deliveries." And then we would do ongoing inspections, and then do the redeliveries and coordinate with the next lessee. So we were really an outsourced leasing company. And when British Aerospace that morphed, they got rid of a lot of that risk. They did one of these reinsurance programs with Marsh. I think it was called the FRIP, Financial Reinsurance Program, where they'd managed to get an insurance policy that would basically underwrite the lease income for the next 5 years. Okay, so in a way they were then able to perhaps not manage the aircraft as closely as they had to. So that contract morphed into something else, and it became a little bit more open market, and we didn't join in the race to the bottom, as I would call it, in terms of man-day rates. But also a lot of that management team, several of them had been hired into a new leasing company in Abu Dhabi called Oasis Leasing. Now Oasis morphed into Waha, and Waha was bought by AerCap. But in those early days, this would have been 98, 99. This was part of a UK government offset program. So again, if I summarize it briefly, the UAE had ordered a bunch of BAE trainers and fighter jets, and there was an obligation on British Aerospace to enter into an offset program. So this really meant, okay, if the UAE are going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars buying UK stuff, what was the UK going to do for the UAE? And one of the things that happened was BAE provided seed capital to start Oasis Leasing. And then Oasis Leasing were doing they did some local deals. I think they did the first deal was a sale lease back of, I think it was 6 or 8 A320s with Gulf Air. So it was becoming a bit of a regional based operating lessor. And again, all of the technical stuff was outsourced to IBA. So I spent a fair bit of time out in Abu Dhabi, working with people like, I think now, Eric Darman, who's with Arena, Simon McLean, who's with AMS. These were the folks I was liaising with in those early days in Abu Dhabi. So, and on the back of that, so if I look back now, it's quite simple to summarize, because we'd started off almost as an outsourced leasing platform for BAE Asset Management. Then we were the servicer or leasing platform for Oasis Leasing. That then morphed and went its own way. And then very soon after that, we'd been talking to Investec, which at the time they had a presence in Sydney, in Australia, and they were very keen to get into raising equity from the Australian superannuation pension funds, and put the Australian dollars to work on US dollar assets. So again, we got involved in effectively starting a leasing platform, and we did all of the outsourced technical and a lot of the sourcing of aircraft. That did then go under the control of Investec in London, which was sort of the central aviation hub for Investec's shipping and aircraft finance department. So and actually then that, if I then fast forward, that entity, it was called Investec Global Aircraft Fund. Most of those assets were sold into actually I forget, World. That then became an ABS structure. But then Investec did other things. Of course, Investec got involved with Goshawk, and we were doing all the technical stuff there. So I would say that sort of epitomizes that we were very much hands-on. We were providing valuations, yes, of course, but we were earning asset management fees as an outsourced servicer. And I think we had a pretty good value proposition. I think in those days, a typical servicer or servicing element of the lease rates would be something like 3% of the lease income would be put into the servicer platform. And if I put it bluntly or crudely, I'd say, well, we can do it at IBA and we'll do it for 1.5% of the lease rate. Quite a blunt instrument. And of course that suited some, didn't suit others, of course, and a lot of, by this time, a lot of the lessors were selling assets with leases in place, but they actually wanted that servicer income. So it was that, and that probably stays true today. I think a lot of assets being sold, you kind of get a servicer package with it if you want it, or if your investors want it. That asset management side, I would say, is still kind of in IBA's DNA, but I think the last 15 years we've seen a real move towards what data does the industry need, where a business is going, and I think a major point was when the old business called Air Claims split into Ascend, and Air Claims was separated. The technical management and inspection side was separated from the valuations and data side, and I think it was eye-opening, because the price paid for the data business was, significant multiples of revenue and EBITDA, and It was probably in those days when it was early days of SaaS or subscription as a service, and we've seen how maybe a lot of things in the world now around subscriptions, whether it's how we're connecting today, or how I watch TV with Sky. Everything's around subscription and the valuation of those businesses. And they're very different.
That keeps on giving.
Yeah. I hope so. But they're very different businesses. I think it needs a different type of team. It needs a different board. It needs a different chairman. And that's really what happened 10 years ago when Laurie exited the business. The buyer of IBA then was a family office, and it literally was a family office because it had Greg Allen and his mother Meg Allen come along to board meetings and discuss how the business was likely to evolve in a changing world of aviation, and it was clear that we needed to get the data into being a revenue earner, not just a nice to have. I think you've had Stu Hatcher on the podcast. He spent a lot of time explaining to you that, so I don't need to repeat that. Other than I was keen. I said, well, look, I'm not a data person. I'm a CEO of what I would call an outsourced asset management business, and I'm an appraiser, and we can probably have a chat about that.
That's too bad.
In a few minutes' time.
I know.
The
recovering appraiser.
So we had we end up saying, we need a chair of the business who comes from data and analytics. We need a CEO with that background. So the decision about seven years ago, so quite well before we'd heard the word COVID, I said, look, I'm quite happy to start heading towards some sort of retirement program, and the plan was we were looking for a CEO of the business who'd come from that world and had a track record of building and exiting successfully from that type of business. And it was, timing, I think, was it was both good and bad. I remember Ian Beaumont came into the business, I think, on March the 13th, 2020. And he was living in France at the time, and the French government went into lockdown 2 weeks ahead of the UK, and we kind of said, oh, hi, and he said, I've got to get back home. And it was an amazing period, because suddenly we're in lockdown and we're joining, whether it was, I don't know, Skype, Zoom. I don't think we had Teams then, and it was amazing, because I remember getting a call from, let's say, our new CEO, and effectively we had a new chairman as well, just joined us 6 months before. And at the time, so I think IBA had grown then, we had about 70 employees, and they said, hey Phil, have you seen the news? The government have announced a furlough scheme that means we can pay people 80% of their salary. They'll get paid 80% of their salaries, and so let's go through the list. Who do we actually need, and who can we put on to furlough? And I said, we're going to need everybody. I know we're like rabbits in the headlights right now, but in the past, IBA has always been needed in a time of crisis, because banks will be having stuff defaulted on, leasing companies will be getting stuff back. We're going to be needed more than ever. I said, so what I don't want to do is put people on furlough and then find that our tech guys have been hired by a bank or a leasing company. Right. And in fact, that then did coincide with Ian saying, well, I want people to build the data platform. So within a short space of time, within a year, I think we'd grown from 70 employees to 100 employees because of that back office requirement of getting data, getting the platform sorted out. So it was an amazing period, really, which, when I look back, was an amazing, almost like amazing management study exercise. What happens when you put a new CEO in a business the day before the world shuts down? So really that transition has continued, and I would say I've gone even more of a back seat now, because as we start to look at, where does IBA go in the future, and I know it's the worst kept secret, it's probably going to go through an exit process at some point. There was some comments that the board were saying to me were, Phil, we've, some of the soundings being made by interested people are that Phil Seymour's still front and centre of IBA, so that's okay, but does he want to sign up for another 5 years? And
isn't it so tough to be wanted so badly, Phil?
I know.
That's kind of just.
I know. I'm just surprised it took you guys so long to call me onto this podcast, guys. I mean, I've been waiting.
Well, Garrick had to really twist my arm. He said,
No,
we're running out of people, and I'm like, you know what? Fine, we'll just call Phil. That's fine.
But I think there's more to that, right? I mean, clearly you're good at what you do and the experience and all that, but consistency. And I think that like the value of consistency, particularly through, I mean, even after the COVID crisis ended, things just continued to change in the industry at IBA, right? So the value of consistency seems very high to those that are looking, from a board perspective.
Yeah. But I think despite what you might think and what I kind of say a bit tongue-in-cheek, for me, the word we haven't mentioned yet on this podcast, and yet it goes back to all of those early days and those faded newspaper cuttings that I've got, is passion, right? Passion's fine, and you do need passion, but it doesn't mean you're successful. Okay, there's plenty of people who are passionate about stuff, but it doesn't mean they're going to employ people and contribute to the economy. So I'm sort of proud of that, but I still want to inspire people about this whole business that we're in. I think it's still fascinating, and I'm still learning stuff, right? And I think I've from the word go, when we, it's different. Laurie Hatchett, it was his business and his baby, and he's going to treat it like one of the family. I think when I got involved, it was more, I don't want to be the tip of the iceberg. I want to encourage other people to be speaking at these conferences and getting their qualifications, because otherwise you can only grow by the number of minutes you have in a day and hours you have in a day. So I wanted to encourage others in the business to step up and do the stuff that I was doing. And I think it is strange, because I think there's a certain reticence. Sometimes people would say, oh, I don't think I can do that because I haven't done it before. And let's face it, we can put that into a real life thing. When Boeing say, oh, we're going to produce a composite aeroplane, it's going to be the 787, how are you going to value that aircraft? Some people would say, well, we've never done that before. How do we value a composite aeroplane? How do we do that? My view would be, well, nobody has ever valued a composite aeroplane, and I think we've got the skills and experience that mean we can do it, right? And I think those are the things that you really want to hear from the younger team. I don't want them to be saying to me, I'm really scared, we haven't done that before. I want to be saying, we give you as much help as possible. How do we judge the value of a a GTF engine today? How do we when the things aren't really lasting on wing long enough? So I think those challenges have always been there, and that's kind of what I like about it. It's what I love what we do because it's so varied. It's not, I don't want to say running an airline must be very much the same, because I'm sure there are distinct challenges with running an airline or running a leasing company. But every day still at IBA, there's stuff coming in that's different. And I think that's the exciting thing. And I'm still learning, right? I'm still learning. And
I totally agree.
Although I'm technically I'm down to kind of like 1 day a week, but I don't really want to be. I'll always be part of it until I suppose ultimately I can realise the shares that I've got in the business. And I suppose that brings us on. I do want to mention the Air T thing because
absolutely. That's very recent, but
a few months ago, the board had actually said to me, "Look, it's not just a case of us saying, oh, you've kind of gone into retirement mode. If there are other opportunities, if you get offered like non-exec director positions or something that are not competing with IBA, then we'd encourage you to do that. Don't feel constrained." And I didn't particularly go out there. I had a chat with friend and colleague of mine, Steve Wheelo, who had just joined Air T back in September to set up the runway advisory business. And we got chatting, and I had a discussion with the CEO, Nick Swenson, and I could see that Air T, with its 15 aviation businesses, was very well rounded in aviation. So it has Contrail, Crestone leasing entity. It's got 3 feeder airlines that feed into the FedEx network. There is a data business, World ACD, based in Amsterdam, that do air freight data, and they've got the MRO and the jet yard storage facility in Marana. So they're very much in that ecosystem that I know and love. And really the idea is that I'd be, being this side of the water, I might see and hear of other opportunities in this part of the world, of what's happening in terms of potential acquisitions, that sort of thing. So it's quite exciting because it means I'm contacting a lot of colleagues in the industry, but with a slightly different hat on. And as I say, I was offered some positions, but I don't just want to be a non-exec director on some board where I join a call once every quarter and say, "Oh, ka-ching, thanks very much for the check." My mantra is, I want to add value. I don't just want to be a cost burden. I'm feeling very privileged and lucky to be in that situation that I can do that. And I think the fit with Air T, it's more, to me, it's more about what's the culture of the business, and am I going to enjoy working with the people who are there? And so far so good.
Yeah, no, thanks. Yeah. And it's, as you say, it's one of those, I think it's why so many of us can kind of stay in the industry for so long, right? Because there's never a dull moment, right? Every day is a new day. And so if you're able to kind of take advantage of your experience and kind of use it for either to better advise clients or to, kind of teach somebody else something new, like, it's great. And I think that's why, we go to conferences and we're like, oh, I can't believe this guy's still here. But at the end of the day, it's everybody likes it. And everybody's like, who knew we were going to go through COVID, right? That was an interesting, a kind of environment to be in. And then who knows what's going to happen this year, right? This is a whole new environment that we're dealing with. Who knows where we're going to be at the end of the year, right? So we want to kind of know, hey, what how are we going to get there? How are we going to get to the end of the year, and where are we going to come out, and how are we going to help our clients, or is the business going to change a little bit because of it? Like, hey, that's interesting, right? It's always fun to kind of get even though it's it's going to be tough times, but it's always interesting to kind of figure out, all right, what's going to happen next.
Yeah, I think I mean, I've been lucky as well, I suppose, because Jane has quite happily come along to ISTAT conferences with me, and I think the very first one, it wasn't necessarily her choice. I'm going to go back to, so it was our 15th wedding anniversary, so it must have been 1993. I was in that phase working for the guys at X-Tour, and we were thinking about getting involved in aircraft appraisals and valuations. And one of the guys said to me, "Hey, have you seen this outfit called ISTAT? They've got a conference in Boca Raton in March the 3rd, 1993. They said, do you want to go to that?" And I said, I'd love to go. I said, but it's Jane Knight's our 15th wedding anniversary. I said, so, if I pay for her to come with me, happy that she comes along. So yeah, we went to Boca Raton, 1993, and yeah, celebrated our 15th wedding anniversary. But I think it might have been on the back of a boat in what do you call it? Is it the intercostal or something? That bit of water,
intercostal waterway,
intercostal. It was an ISTAT reception on the back of a boat, and I can remember, Bill Cumberledge and what's his name? Is it Cox? Anyway, people who still go to conferences now, who I saw as my mentors, and now I'm thinking, wow, that's 32 years ago. And Jane now Jane will often talk to her buddies from ISTAT, and she'll say to me, "Hey, are we going to Austin to that conference? You haven't mentioned it." I say, "I'm meant to be retired. I'm not going to go to that." And but it's become a little social thing. Are we going to go to ISTAT again? Yeah, we are. And I do want to attempt to ruin songs at Club ISTAT on a Monday night, doing my Bryan Adams impersonation. So I think it is. It is still pretty much that ISTAT club, which then brings me on to that whole appraisal thing, because I, as they say, there's no such thing as a free lunch. The guys at X-Tour were saying, "Well, go there, have a listen about this appraiser program, because we think you should become an appraiser." And I said, "Yeah, it seems like a good idea." I go to some of these conferences and I see some of the people on appraisal panels, and I think I can do that job. If
it's still that way. It's
do that
still
better.
Nothing has changed.
Yeah.
No, actually, the first guy I saw, it was John Vitale, of course, from Avitas, who were quite well established then. And I thought, I'm never going to be John Vitale. I'm never going to be that tall, and I'm never going to speak in the same eloquent American way. But I think in those days, I suppose it was Avitas, MBA, and those folks, those mentors like Fred Klein and Fred Bearden, Bill Bath, God rest his soul. That was it was kind of the Wild West with appraisals. And I can remember that in those days, OEMs, I think, regarded appraisers as a complete pain in the butt. It was like, why are you guys asking us about pricing? And I wouldn't say it was down to me, but I'd say to the folks at the manufacturers, I said, look, we've been asked to value these aircraft. We need a bit more information about what's happening with pricing, because don't just send me the list price, because we know that nothing really sells at list price. So at the moment we're discounting your list price by 60%. And I don't know if that's good or bad. But all I'm saying is if we've got to effectively make that up, it'd be far better in your interests if you give us a bit more information. So it was kind of a bit of a threat, I suppose, that, treat us with a bit of respect and give us a bit more information. And that kind of then followed into the leasing sector, where leasing companies would invite us, and still do, I think Dublin, SMBC have an appraiser day where they share a bit of information. Yeah, it's confidential. We sign stuff. We're never going to give specific serial number information away, but it's obviously in their interest, and sometimes we don't believe all we hear. But it kind of, I think, made the appraisal process a little bit more professional and accepted. And I think now appraisers are seen as facilitators to the industry.
Yeah.
I
totally
think that's
agree.
appropriate, right? I mean, look, the OEMs were dragging their feet because they wanted to protect their pricing at all costs, and pricing is not value either, right? Those are very different numbers. So, although one can affect the other in a market, but if you go to an OEM and they give you list price, the only leverage you have is to say, okay, I'm going to discount it 60%. Now it's your job to build it back up. And it feels like they have, right? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, Garrick, you're kind of in this as well. But it feels like the OEMs have taken the appraisers more seriously and decided to work with them rather than basically kind of just consider kind of an outside voice that doesn't matter, because this is how these aircraft are being financed. I wonder if it was the great financial crisis when we had that kind of financing crisis and in unavailability of capital at that time that kind of forced the OEMs to look at that.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I think it was probably sometime after 9/11, during that kind of uptick, when I think the OEM started to kind of do a little bit more. There were a few individuals, I think, that took the lead of, hey, we really need to talk to the appraisers a bit more and share some things with them. And then, and unfortunately, inevitably you have a changing of the guard. And so we have to kind of go back to square one in terms of, training people in terms of, okay, this is why you need to have these events, and this is why you need to share this information with us. And then, but it's taken a while. And we still kind of go through those challenges of getting them to understand, like, okay, look, we're being asked to value your assets that you're selling your customers. The more information we have, right, the better we can do our jobs, and the more comfortable investors will feel about putting their money to work, investing in your assets. So, but
better
still,
yet,
yeah.
If you're not telling me what it's worth, the people your buyers are, and those numbers are going to be low.
Right.
So if you're not a voice, then it's just not being represented.
But but I do think that the messaging and the communication has definitely, I think, gotten better over the last probably 10, 15 years. But it's still not perfect, because it's, if it was transparent and if we knew everything, then that we probably only need half of us in this call. So there's I think a benefit to that for us, but overall, I think people do kind of understand that, hey, look, if we're going to ask for the expertise of these guys that say they know the markets, well, where are they getting their information from? And so that, I think OEMs figured that out.
Yeah, I mean, there was a move. Do you remember, Garrick? There was a move, probably, it may almost be 15, 20 years ago. And it actually may have been in the wake of 9/11. There was an attempt, and I've forgotten the guy's name. It was a finance guy. He was with DVB Bank, and then I think he went to AirCap for a while. Terrible that I can't remember his name. But he said he would quite happily front this transparency thing. He would be willing to give appraisers some of the info that he had from the bank, if it meant it would kind of, I don't say open the floodgates, but could something happen that made it more of a clearinghouse of appraisal data? But it's interesting. A few people had a problem. There was a point that, hang on, we need to be careful. We can't be seen to be acting as a cartel, right? We do need to have independence. We do need to have our own voices. But there was also, and I think it was Fred Bearden, I remember him saying that as long as there are some lessors, banks and brokers, they're still making a lot of money out of the fact that appraisers don't always value the same kit at the same value, right? And if I dare I say, that kind of continues today, but it's not. I don't see anything bad in that. If you're an airline and you've ordered 60 aeroplanes, it's inevitable that the price, or 200 aeroplanes, the price compared to a list price is bound to be some sort of discount. And then if you want to go and sell that with a lease attached to the leasing company, it's an open discussion about whether, well, if the, let's say, average appraised value of that new aircraft is 50 million, but I've only paid, in effect, 38 million, I've got a choice to make at the airline. I can either say, right, I'm going to finance it at 50. That means I've got 12 million to play with as working capital, but there's a price to pay for that because the lease rate is going to be based on a percentage of 50 million and it's not going to be a percentage of 38 million. But I don't see anything wrong in that. It's actually up to the airline to figure out, are they happy to pay a lease rate based on the 50 million, and it's up to the leasing company to decide whether the credit and the asset are worth doing that deal. So I think that's, I don't think there's anything illegal in that. It's just market forces. So I think that's fair.
Yeah, I mean, look, the appraisal process is a bottom-up attempt to identify how much the market may or may not be willing to pay for something. And what is the market? Like, it could be an airline, it could be a lessor, it could be, down the line, a product company, whatever, or it could be some random airline that just really needs RB211 engines and are suddenly pay way over whatever the market is, right? So as an appraiser, like, at some point you have to draw the line and draw the box. That's why the ISAT appraiser program exists. I'm using all of this to get to the question I really want to ask, and I want to transition into the hyper modern here. How do you as appraisers consider the impact of tariffs? That's right, I said the T word. Does it impact, right? So now we have geographies imposing different costs. Does that impair the value? Does it increase the value elsewhere? How do we even start to think about this in terms of the overall valuation process?
The first impact is on order book, because we know a lot of Boeing aircraft are destined for China. Okay, will there be an impact? I think there already was a bit of a kind of a Cold War going on. The Chinese hadn't sort of fully accepted all of the MAX deliveries and things like that. So there are already some issues there. So I suppose there could be an impact on Boeing in terms of the order book. But when you've got an order book that's 10 years out, actually there's going to be somebody else to take those assets anyway, aren't there? If I put it very, very crudely. But I do think there's still a lot of unknowns about it, about exactly will there be exemptions for certain bits of equipment, and how does the MRO industry work with transferring of parts between one jurisdiction and another? It is a really complicated mess, quite frankly, of the detail that's going on. And as we know, it might change tomorrow anyway. So it makes things quite difficult. I would say, if I was looking at things, very from afar, a little bit of a macro view, the biggest issue I'd have thought is around order book and numbers of aeroplanes that are going to be delivered. But as I say, with the backlog there is, I don't think there's going to be a big impact.
Well, we have the very near-term deliveries. These are airplanes that are already built in the spec, delivering to, or that should deliver to airlines, which could be subject to tariffs, right? So it's very difficult to transition those airplanes. They're built in the spec. Then you have the airplanes after that say the OEMs can move around and better align. I'm thinking more Airbus in this context, where they have some flexibility, actually a fair amount of flexibility, to move 320 production into Mobile, 321 production into Mobile, Alabama. That changes some of the tariff calculation versus Toulouse and Hamburg. The same on the 220. But I guess more just in general, if we just go forward with an assumption, let's just say it's 10% for everybody. Forget China and the 3.9 whatever million percent, whatever it is lately. But if we just assume the U.S. has a long term, I don't know, I'm not saying this will be the case, but let's say the U.S. has a long-term 10% tariff. How does that affect how you think about valuing a fleet? Does it become, do the valuations have to be a U.S. A320 and a non-U.S., like a U.S. imported A320 versus a non-U.S. imported A320? Do those get different valuations? Do you not consider valuation at all? I'm very curious how the thought process would go in considering this new type of just add-on cost.
I've just got this horrible thought that we're going to get a call from an operator in China saying, can we value the new delivery of a MAX at 125% more, or 145% more than
145%?
Yeah. Because
but that's different, because I don't think the Chinese, so imports into China from the US are based on what China puts the import tax on. I don't know that they've put that on aircraft. I don't know much about the Chinese tariffs on US stuff. It's the import into the US and then the content and how that's split apart.
Yeah, look, I think the ultimately, to me, the valuation of the aircraft is what's happening in the market. Are there comparable values that we can use? But also, will there be an impact on air traffic? Will there be reductions in flying? Will that mean that actually we've got overcapacity in some routes and regions? I think I saw some data. Boeing had a consultants meeting in London. I think they did a similar one in other regions, and they were quite open, really, saying, could there be general anti-American thoughts that people won't fly to Disney World in Florida or something? Will that impact? And they sort of had concluded, and this was before we had the peaks and troughs of some of that decision making. These were, thoughts put together a couple of months ago. Was there could be an overall impact on GDP that would reduce some of those forecasts by about 1%. It wasn't going to be a 10% hit on GDP, but it was sort of a 1% issue on GDP. And as we know, air traffic does tend to follow GDP quite closely. So I suppose my issue would be, if you then follow through those consequences, would that lead to less passenger traffic, less freight traffic? Does that then mean you've got those, I mentioned that overcapacity? Will that have an impact on aircraft values? Will it be will it just correct the current issues for the next? I don't see these supply chain issues getting fixed in less than 4 or 5 years.
Now.
So, yeah. So I think, really, I can't see it suddenly impacting stuff. I can't see us at IBA saying, we're going to drop 10% off Boeing new deliveries or Airbus new deliveries or whatever. But I don't know,
that's
Derek,
an
have
interesting...
you got any thoughts? Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I tend to agree. I don't think it's first of all, there's still so much uncertainty in terms of the daily changes that we're seeing, right? So it's kind of, once we get a sense of, look, this is what it is, I think you can put your arms around kind of, okay, how is that going to impact pricing of parts or pricing of airplanes? But overall, I mean, we're in an environment today where, we're still dealing with, the shortage of certain airplanes. And so airlines wanting to keep used capacity. So I think any decline in traffic that we're starting to see, in the US, you're starting to see kind of the traffic not flowing into the US from, areas like Canada, Mexico, even Europe now is down as well. Ultimately, that just probably gives airlines that have been, kind of hungry for new capacity to kind of go, well, we're not getting it as fast, but that's okay because we don't really need it as much as we do, right? Mm-hmm. So how, it doesn't necessarily mean that, hey, we're just, going to flood the market with used airplanes or we're just going to get rid of capacity. No, I think it just means we'll hold steady for a little bit, knowing that we're probably not going to get as many, new airplanes as we wanted to, or maybe we pause deliveries on new airplanes because we don't want to deal with paying the new tariffs. And so we're going to wait to see what happens there. So I think that, there's a couple of different things that are going on that just kind of, I guess balance the market a little bit more than it has been. So
I think I really like the way Phil was kind of going. I mean, you did as well. I'll take it down to a very fundamental level, like what is value? And I think a mistake that a lot of people are making is assuming that value and cost of building are the same thing. And if it increases the cost to buy something by 10%, that doesn't necessarily mean that the value goes up 10% because they're different. This is not a cost plus industry. It's usually a cost minus industry, generally. But you kind of touched on, and I'm really interested in the idea, and I'm really glad to hear you kind of touch on this, Phil. The idea that this is not necessarily inflationary from like an aircraft value and all-in process, because we already know there's a negative impact to demand. We're seeing it. People are not traveling. Foreigners are not traveling to the United States. Foreign visitors are not traveling to the United States at the same levels that they were last year. We already know that. We saw that with Mexico and Canada 2 months ago. We're seeing that almost universally. I think the Middle East is the one exception today. Yep. That's deflationary, right? Mm-hmm. So when you're looking at, I guess maybe this kind of gets into the base value versus current market value debate, which is forever. That'll never, like, that's always just an ongoing one. But the idea going forward that you've added, say, 10% to the cost of some airplanes, if it is 10%, whatever it's going to be. But there's this unknown offset, which is how much is this going to affect demand, which lowers the value, right? We're at this very interesting time. Phil, I loved listening to you talk about, the recession during kind of 90, 91. We talked about 9/11, the Great Financial Crisis, COVID, of course. This feels kind of along, not COVID, right? I mean, that's very different, but this feels like something that we'll be talking about in 10 years as a potential crisis, or not. Like, who knows? I checked the news as of 10:23 a.m. Central Time on April 11th. Nothing has changed for the last 2 hours.
It's still early.
Happy to report.
It's not lunchtime in the US. So
But actually, so another impact is it's not just about the cost of those goods. If you look what's happening to the US dollar now, I'm pretty upset because Air T pay me in US dollars. And actually, I have to convert those to pounds.
You thought you were great. You thought you had them.
I know. You just took a pay cut.
Yeah, just take a pay cut. But the serious point here is there's a lot of airlines around the world who don't earn US dollars, but they have to pay their lease rates in US dollars and they pay their fuel in US dollars. And if the US dollar becomes cheaper for them, that's great. That's great for many airlines around the world. Will be doing high fives because suddenly their $300,000 lease rate means they don't have to spend as much of their local currency converting it to US dollars. So, this is a fascinating thing, that whole world of economics, and I don't claim to be an economist. You'll have to get Stu Hatcher back on, is that, everything is interrelated there. And I think there will be some benefits to a lot of airlines around the world in a weaker dollar. So I think
that's really interesting, and it's been the last 2 days.
Yeah.
Like that. I wasn't aware of just how quickly this moved.
I think so. That before Christmas, so it was like 1.4, and now it's 1.3 something. So it's like an 8%. Difference.
Yeah.
So
I think the euro is like 114 versus like 108 or something. So
So actually, it might have the reverse effect. So there's me thinking, there may be this anti-American sentiment, like, we're not going to go to Disney World, Florida, because I don't want to go to the USA. But actually, the holidays suddenly got cheaper, and I'm guaranteed a bit more sunshine in Florida compared to Paris, right? So
it's it's a very, and that's to me is what I love about the industry that we work in, is that there are so many different nuances of our business that you can answer. Somebody asks you a question and you can have multiple answers because of things like this, where you can be like, oh wait, so there's tariffs that are being put in place, so therefore traffic's going to be down. Yes. Okay, but that also means, if the weaker dollar, does that, it benefits other airlines and other countries to be able to travel more? Yes. So, wait, what? There's like so many different things going on. And then at the end of the day, you're like, all right, so how do you value things? Well, you have to try to take into account everything, right? And come up with that number. But there's so many different nuances. And I think that's why, going back to the point that you made about, looking at the variances in some of the appraisal firms, it's because of the fact that there are so many different situations that you get data points from. That's why there's nuances. And that's why investors can see opportunities to kind of go, okay, well, based on what we're trying to do, based on this opportunity, right, we feel the pricing here makes sense. And yet, somebody else may have said, hey, but we paid a lot less, so we don't think that makes sense for us. Okay, well, that still worked for you and it works for them, right? And so that's why you have those differences that still work.
Yeah. So I'm actually feeling quite encouraged now, thinking that the dollar's getting weaker.
Come on over.
We're
very happy, happy to spend.
Now, you may not be able to leave, but, it's okay.
Well, you'll have to pay the customs agent to get in, right? And then,
Yeah. Okay. I've been to countries like that before.
Yeah.
You always carry cash with you? Just in case.
Yeah.
Like, what's that extra bag? Don't worry about it. It's just in case. So, I mean, so I guess from your side, and I know we're getting close to the hour and a half here, but, when you think about everything that's going on and obviously you're, what does the next 5 years look like in terms of, what's going on with aviation, right? I mean, and that's probably viewed as long-term right now with everything that's going on, but like, what do you think that looks like over the next 5 years?
I think, to some extent it's very predictable, isn't it? Because, as I say, the order books are kind of going out way beyond that. So we know that it will change. We know that some of those orders won't be fulfilled, but then there'll be others who pick those up. So I think at one level, that whole delivery process is kind of sorted. I don't see... I really wish Boeing would bring out a new model aeroplane, but I don't know if that's on the horizon yet. And even if it was, we probably wouldn't see those coming into production for another 5 years anyway. I mean, let's face it. I remember going to the Boeing. You may be there yourself, Garrick, when a bunch of appraisers invited to Boeing to look at the 777X back in 90. Oh no, it wasn't 90. Sorry, 2015, and the thought was it would enter service in 2021. And here we are in 2025. And I know similar stories with the 787, and it's not just a Boeing thing. The A380 was delayed in getting into service and things. So there's 5 years, whilst on the one hand it's a very long time, in terms of aircraft production and deliveries, it's not that far out. I think it's more of an issue where we're going to be in 15 years' time. Will there be, replacements of the most common types, the A320s and 737s? Will there be that sort of magic number that historically has always created a change in an aircraft, has been a 15% improvement in engine efficiency, fuel burn and time on wing? That just hasn't happened with the most recent engine types. They might burn less than, they might burn 15% less fuel, but they're not staying on wing long enough. And I don't think they're going to really fix that. I really don't. My experience.
And you only have
engines,
one player that's saying they can do it again, and it's Rolls. They're like the worst at time on wing, right? And so, like there's no visibility to what could possibly be next. Yeah,
a couple of years ago, if we were having this call, we'd be saying, oh yeah, well, Airbus have promised some sort of hydrogen-powered aircraft by 2035, or they've kind of kicked that down the road. And I think one thing. So what I'll say now, okay, 2050, allegedly going to be the time when it's going to be net zero in aviation. Well, I'll be celebrating my 91st birthday in 2050, and you're all invited. And
great.
I bet we're not in a net zero situation. Okay, we'll still be being battered by folks who think that aviation isn't doing enough to be more sustainable. And but let's not go down there. We haven't got another hour and a half. But I would say that
I just want to point out. I just want to warn you, Phil, that we're going to show up at your birthday party, your 91st birthday party.
Okay.
And you'd be like, why are you here? And I'm going to play this.
We're going to put with our net zero hats, and banners. Yeah, we're here to celebrate. Let's go. Actually, you know what? No, we'll just see you at the ISTAT reception.
Yeah.
91st.
2050.
Oh my God. Yeah, that would be great. Well, hey, look, if we're all alive and kicking there and I can remember this conversation, it would be great.
That's the win in itself. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's actually when we're doing the podcast with one of your kids, that's when we'll show this one just to remind them of what you said, on that time. So, which, 25 years though, hopefully 25 years. Yeah. Hopefully I'm on my way out too.
Is that 25 years? Yeah. That'll be, okay. Well, I think my eldest son will probably be retired before I am. He's a pilot. They retire pretty early, don't they? They do things properly. They save for their retirement. I've just really been more of a spend guy.
Spend it while you got it, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man. Well, look, Phil, it's been great to have you on. Thank you for making the time to talk with us. Obviously, I've known you for a long time, so it was nice to kind of chat with you about your background and everything else. A lot of great stories. So thank you for being on, and certainly look forward to seeing you around the conference circuit when you get the chance. But thank you.
Great. Yeah, and thank you guys. I've enjoyed that time. I hope people get as much pleasure out of it that us three have had anyway. And see you all again soon.
Big question is, how much do you think the stock market will drop while we're doing this podcast?
It's probably up today a little bit, I'd say.
What, you think so? I mean,
Nope.
I don't know. I guess no.
I was wrong.